Welcome to week 3. Actually, it's week 4. I'm so messed up this week by having that short Labor Day week or follow the week following Labor Day weekend. And I apologize for all the snafus with the video. That was kind of crazy this week, right? We're going to go ahead and jump right into the syllabus today. And again, thank you for being patient with me. Do keep those emails coming. I try to check the classroom at least once a day for your questions and concerns. And I do want to know what I can do to make this experience smooth and fluid for you. Okay, we are going into, like I said, week 4 of the course, September 8th through 14th. There's been some confusion from some of you, and I'm so glad you asked on what's due and when. And I find this to be the roadmap, this particular chart right here, because I like that it has a date, and I created it, so I actually copied another professor's, so I'm not being completely arrogant with this. I liked it because it shows the date, it tells what we're talking about, and then in red the assignments are listed, and then they correlate with the classroom content. I teach this course in several different ways in terms of a half semester or a full semester course. And so the way the content is loaded doesn't necessarily always flow by week like you might think it would. It flows by unit and concept, so you have to watch what's due over here. And it looks like we are ready to start our first paper this week, but we're not really starting it because we've already laid all the foundation for it. Let me remind you, back in week 2 we had a thesis worksheet. It might be a good idea to dust that guy off and look at him, that thesis worksheet, meaning him, in the context of choosing one of these writings. So you're going to choose one of your readings from last week, one of these, and you're going to develop a thesis statement at least using the idea of a they say, I say statement with a subordinate clause. Look back at that worksheet if you need help. And we're going to have 2 grades this week. One is going to be a peer edit and the other one's going to be a final draft. So the assignment itself, let's go into the classroom to kind of take a closer look. In course content, what this will look like. And if I open this up, I'm going to see it might all of a sudden look very familiar because it's going to be kind of the same format. We're walking through the writing process. We've done our pre-writing by reading, and this is a review, okay? So this is going to look familiar again. It's going to look like, wait a minute, I'm looking at the same thing. I'm showing you how it builds, okay? So now that you've done your initial pre-writing step, this is where you're going to go with it. You may have already done this. You may have already looked at what it is about this article that jumped out at you, or why you're choosing a certain essay. If you remember from our initial discussion about this paper last week, our prompt is to summarize and respond to one of the writings, and our thesis is going to then name the article we're summarizing, possibly the author, and it will include a summary statement of what the author is saying and our own. So according to such and such article, the author says, fill in the blank, and I agree because that would be a sample thesis format. I kind of walk you through some thought processes using the template article that you read a couple weeks ago by Gerald Graff. And here would be a sample thought process I'll let you look at. This might just be kind of the foundational stuff. And then you start having forming it into a thesis statement. And so there's my thought process as it transitions to a thesis statement, and you can use these samples to model after for your article that you're choosing. You're choosing one article from the readings from last week. Again, one essay, article. Let's not call them stories because they're not, but one of those items from last week, one of the readings. Then you're going to organize your essay, and by having a thesis statement, the reason I'm kind of a big stickler on this format is that it sets you up that this part is the naysayer or the argument behind the argument, perhaps. Or in this case, you could set the although clause up as the summary part so that it invites a place for you to summarize your article. So although while Reichel relates her experiences with limited teaching on a history that was embarrassing to her country from a German perspective, I see similar patterns in our own American education system where embarrassing moments are not given enough attention in the classroom. Okay, so that the summary would be in this subordinate clause, it's less important. We're going to balance it when we actually write the paper, but we really want the sticking point to be on our original thoughts. So back down to here, jumping off of that thesis statement then, we can kind of get a feel for organization. And here would be a sample of free writing for organization. Do you have to free write for organization? Absolutely not. The only things I'm collecting for this, for these two assignments are evidence of posting an initial draft and the reply that goes with that in your peer editing, and then your final draft. And I'll go as far as to say, well, actually, I'm moving ahead of myself. I'll tell you what the expectations are for each of those in a little bit more detail in a moment. Okay, so then you're writing. You're going to make sure that your thesis works for you. You might have to do some trimming and rearranging. And build on your thesis statement. Let your thesis statement be your guide. And this is just a sample based on the writings by that PDF from Gerald Graff. I used that as a topic so I didn't steal any of your topics. You might have to revisit your thesis. In fact, I recommend that as you write a paper, to make sure that you really end up writing about your thesis statement, that before you start the next paragraph in your draft, that you read the thesis statement again, and even maybe at the end of each paragraph. So you write your thesis statement and then you start developing your paper. I would even recommend keeping your introduction to last, okay? You write your thesis. Thesis is usually most effectively placed at the end of the first paragraph, not to give you too many formulas, but it's something to consider. But before I write my first paragraph, I'm going to read my thesis, I'm going to write, and then I'm going to revisit the thesis to make sure I've really stayed on track. If I keep feeling myself pull away from the thesis, it might be time to rewrite the thesis in a different way so my paper is easier to write. Okay, and I, again, recommend keeping the introduction and conclusion for the end. And the way that our minds work, we do tend to latch on to the first thing and the last thing that we hear or read. Imagine yourself, maybe if you grew up in a church, for example, and the pastor would start with a story. How many of us really remember the story and nothing else often? Or remember, we catch on when they say, well, in conclusion, or I'm going to wrap this up with, and all of a sudden our ears perk up. Think of that even in the lectures you've been, maybe even in this one right now where you're hearing me rattle on and on, you're waiting for those cue words, right? We want to look at attention getters. We want to engage our reader with things like quotes and illustrations, statistics, shocking statements, lists, or maybe something else that you can think of. And one way that it's not mandatory, but one way to kind of self-write your conclusion every time. I'm a big one on having formulas because it helps you write papers more time efficiently. So one thing I do is once I get a hook, I try to tie my conclusion in with the hook. I might bring up the end of a story, or I might bring up the quote again, or I might have a coordinating quote, or a finish an illustration, or end where you begin, because it creates sort of a sense of unity in your paper. You don't have to do that, but it does help with cohesiveness. It also helps with time efficiency because you don't have to reinvent something entirely. Okay, refining a good thing into a better thing. And basically, I kind of was telling you in this about an awareness test. I might even throw this into as a secondary video this week that you might enjoy. So I'm going to skip over the explanation of that. But you can't always find your own editing errors, and that's why we peer edit in this class. And here's some tips for effective revising and editing. Reread with a goal in mind, reread with a twist. And this is if you're editing somebody else's paper or yourself. I actually wrote this list with the idea that I'm editing for myself, but the enlisting help obviously means finding a peer to edit with you, maybe even outside this class, and that's fine. Okay, so what is the assignment for this week? We're going to draft, revise, and edit our paper. And for the part that you first post for assignment 2-4 for the peer edit, if you don't have your whole paper done, that doesn't bother me as much as posting it too late because it doesn't give students any chance, other students any chance to edit. So if we can make it our goal to have our rough draft or part of the rough draft, even an introduction, and maybe even a statement of what you'd like somebody to look for, maybe a weakness you know you have if you're not comfortable with your thesis statement, for example, post your introduction and ask your peers to look at your thesis statement to see if it's clear. Okay, so you can post some commentary with your, and you can do it. You don't have to make it as an attachment. You can post it right onto the whiteboard in the discussion board if you wish. Okay, but do save it. Don't create more work for yourself. So post it by Wednesday at midnight. I'm not going to penalize you if you don't because this class is about flexibility. That's part of taking an online class. But if you can post it by Wednesday at midnight, you're going to get better, higher quality responses from the rest of us. So if you could do that, that'd be super. And you're going to respond to, as part of that grade, you're going to respond to peers as well. The way our gradebook is set up, it's hard for me to gather discussion board data and put it into the gradebook. So I wanted to ask a favor of you, and this is for all discussion boards. Please create a document or copy and paste into the board, so I don't care if it's not in a document, back to me in the assignment Dropbox, your initial post and what you said to others. You can't control if anybody has a conversation with you about your writing, but you can control your replies. So to get full credit for this assignment, you're going to do 2 peers, and you are going to put your initial post out there and copy it over to the assignment Dropbox for me. Then the final item is that you're going to turn the paper in, correct? So let's close out of this screen. And we call this publishing. This is your final draft. So I'm going to open this screen up, and again, you're going to see a little bit of a kind of a redundant pattern here of me kind of talking you through what's going on. This is the final paper assignment. So when you turn in your final paper, you're going to copy and paste the self-evaluation feedback sheet. And you're going to go all the way down to the very bottom, and you're going to right click, and then when you come to paste options, I'd like you to choose, if it lets you, it's not letting me right now, but I think if I was on another document it would. You want to do the picture one, because if you do it just text, it makes it all crazy and I don't get to see the chart. Because what I'm going to do is when you turn your paper in, you're going to type in your responses to 1 through 8, and when I turn your paper back to you, I'm going to mark where you're at on the rubric according to my evaluation of your paper. I'm going to give you one thing I really loved about your paper and one goal I'd really like you to have for your next paper. So that goes actually onto your paper. A couple reminders about this paper. This is the rubric for grading it. This is the college's rubric. It must be an MLA format. It must have internal citations, and you're only using the one source that you choose from the readings from last week. So internal citations and works cited. This evaluation can go at the very end behind the works cited. That'd be fine. Okay, if you have questions, I know this is our first paper, so this sort of is a scary jumping off point sometimes, but if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to put my funny little video that makes the point about why it's fun to have peer editors, because it's hard to know what you're looking for in editing your own work if you don't if you don't know your own weaknesses. So having an outside view looking in could help us. Have a great week.